Good morning. The NC Chamber Workplace Diversity and Inclusion Conference will now begin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Emmy Boyette, pronouns she, her, hers, Director of Marketing for the NC Chamber, and I am thrilled to be the MC for today's very first virtual edition of our annual Workplace Diversity and Inclusion Conference. If you would like closed captioning for this event, please click on the CC button in the menu to enable captions on your screen. And to get us right into the flow of things today, I'd like to go ahead and thank our presenting sponsor, BASF, for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank our gold sponsors, Cree Wolfspeed, the Diversity Movement, and Martin Marietta for their support. Silver sponsors today include Fidelity Investments, Smith Anderson, and Town Bank. Our bronze sponsors are AT&T, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Our exhibitor level sponsors are Honda Aircraft Company and Allscripts. So once again, thank you to all of our sponsors for your immense support of today's very important event. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind you of a few housekeeping items. If you are interested in HRCI credits for attending today, you're going to get some instructions in a recap email that is sent out tomorrow. In addition to the great conversations that we have here in our virtual room today, we encourage you to also join the conversation online by using hashtag NCTalksDiversity. Also, if you have any questions for any of today's speakers, we encourage you to use the QA function at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. We suggest that you refrain from using the chat box because things do tend to get lost when people type in there. And if you are going through those Q&A questions that have been submitted and you see one that you think in particular is a really great question and you would like to see answered, just use the upvote function to make sure that that gets pushed to the top of the queue. Now, let's get down to business. Today's event comes at a tragically imperative time, I think we would all agree, excuse me, considering the recent events that have really rocked our nation's conscience. Out of respect for those who have lost their lives at the hands of racial injustice and in efforts to clear our own thoughts and mentally prepare for today's challenging conversations, we will now have a moment of silence and we invite you to join us. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing BASF's Senior Vice President of Agricultural Solutions for North America, Paul Rea, to provide some welcome remarks. So Paul, I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, thank you very much and good morning, everyone. And on behalf of BASF, welcome to this year's NC Chamber Workplace Diversity Conference. It's great to be with you here today. Clearly, virtual is a new way to meet, but I can't see all of your faces, but I'm sure you're out there. And I'd really like to extend a big warm welcome. It's great to have you here and at a really important time to have this discussion. So we're looking forward to engaging with everyone. As Emmy mentioned, now more than ever, diversity and inclusion discussions and action are critical so that we can make our workplaces and our society safe and equitable for everyone. Following the unnecessary and tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others, we cannot be silent in the face of what is happening in our country. We must speak up against injustice, racism, hate, and discrimination. And we must stop actions and words that do not promote equality and safety for all. At BASF, we have a zero tolerance for discrimination and harassment in all forms, and our commitment is unwavering. As a corporate citizen and with respect and understanding for the fear, rage, and uncertainty that is so deeply evident in our world today, BASF adds our voice and our actions to those calling for true change. This is more about than business. This is about us as people who care about each other and need each other. Many people are hurting right now, and we hurt together. We must make change happen together. We must stand together in an intense commitment and be part of positive change that is desperately needed in our companies and our communities and the broader world. While there is much to discuss on this topic today, we're going to focus on workplace diversity and inclusion and how we can make important steps in our workplace to be more equal, more welcoming, and more accepting environments and powerfully inclusive for everyone. We all play a vital role in this effort, and BASF is determined to play our part. I'd like to thank the NC Chamber once again for hosting this conference and for their continued commitment to providing this space where we can explore our differences through conversations that build bridges and learn from each other by walking in each other's shoes and seeing the world from a different perspective. This helps us learn and understand, and I think be better people overall. The Chamber has included content and session speakers that will provide new knowledge and will make us think about how we can strengthen our own organisations, perhaps change our own behaviour, and be a more diverse and inclusive society overall. For those of you that maybe are unfamiliar with BASF, we're one of the world's leading chemical companies, and we create chemistry for a sustainable future. Simply, this means we make active ingredients and products that are in thousands of uses all over the world every single day, such as paint, makeup, suntan lotion, insulation, flooring, concrete, textiles, transmission fluid, and probably the plastics in your car that you drove maybe in the future. RTP is our North American headquarters for our Agricultural Solutions Division, where we have over 1,500 dedicated team members who live, work, and embrace all that this part of North Carolina has to offer. And let's face it, there's a lot to embrace here. We create innovative technologies so farmers can grow and protect our food supply for today and in the future. We also support customers in the turf and ornamentals and pest control business. And this helps protect our green spaces we all enjoy and ensures the health of residential and commercial properties. We also work extensively locally with our community partners like the NC Chamber, the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, and many other partner organisations so that we can build a strong community right here in North Carolina. Diversity and inclusion is important to us because we know that in order to be the most innovative, we need diverse perspectives. We need our team members fully engaged in all that we do. And in order to provide an environment that fosters diversity of thought and encourages differences in opinions and perspectives, we must have a culture of inclusion. But like many of us, we're on a journey. And so we're constantly re-examining our practices, our learnings, our experiences so that we can get even better. And that's why you'll find there's a large representation here from BASF, because we want to improve, we want to learn from everyone here, from their experiences, their perspectives, so that we can all get better. My challenge to you though today is, let's learn new ways in which we could be a more diverse and an inclusive leader ourselves. Perhaps you could ask yourself these questions. What is your self-awareness, and do you know where you have blind spots? I know I do, and it's important to check them regularly. What are your own personal values? This helps us to understand how we make decisions. You may need to examine how you grew up and what experiences shape those values. They can be very good, but sometimes they can also have blind spots. Do you look at every single team member and colleague that you work with as unique and different and with valuable viewpoints and perspectives, and do you seek those out? Do you truly listen to understand others' perspective, not just to listen, but to understand? Do you make sure that everyone is included and you don't leave anyone behind? These are the questions I'm going to be asking myself today as I listen to a great program of speakers that have a heap of experience, and I'm looking forward to taking away new actions where we can build an even stronger and better BASF. In closing, my final challenge to you is to take note of the important discussion, topics, phrases, and quotes. And go back to your teams and talk with your colleagues about what you've learned today. Share it at home, share it in your community, and share it in the organization that you work with. Take home at least 2 viewpoints that were maybe different to where you started today. Let's make sure we share those with others and engage in the conversation. And most importantly, take action so we can build an even better society for all. Thanks again for attending the conference. Looking forward to a very enjoyable session. And again, thanks to the NC Chamber for having us today. Thank you.
These are our people. These are more of our people. This is where some of them work. These are some of the places we work in. They're doing jobs like these, creating products that help places like this and this. These products are helping people across the globe. People like them. Farmers, scientists, families, children. We love helping people. That's why we do what we do. BASF Agricultural Products North America has a wealth of employment options. Whatever you want to be, you can be it, because the success of our company rests on the success of our team. These are some of our labs, our greenhouses, our break rooms, our coffee machines. I use this every day. We're creating chemistry for a sustainable future, because the people we're helping are the future. The world's population doesn't stop growing. Neither does our workforce. Diverse ideas help us solve some of the world's toughest challenges, like feeding a growing population. We're looking for more people like us. People that help. We create chemistry where diverse perspectives find common ground. These are our people, and this is your spot on the team. BASF. We create chemistry.
There we go. I was muted. Thank you so much, Paul. I definitely am right there with you, excited about what I'm going to take away from today's event and the heap of experience, as you said, that our panelists share. Before we roll into our morning keynote, we are actually going to host a poll to get your feedback on a topic that relates very closely to what our keynote speaker will discuss. So right now you should see the poll pop onto your screen and you can answer directly in the box that just showed up. I'm going to give everyone a moment to do that. And then we're going to share the results with you. Whenever we get a good number of responses, we will display the results of that poll. All right, let's take a look. Where are my Generation Z folks? Maybe they're not quite in the workforce yet. So it looks like our greatest representation comes from Generation X, followed then by millennials and baby boomers. They will all be mentioned today in our keynote speaker's presentation. We're going to really hopefully be able to take away a lot from Tru's discussion on how these different generations can work together effectively and innovatively in our workforce. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce Tru Pettigrew, our morning keynote speaker. Tru Pettigrew is a celebrated author, engaging speaker, committed community leader, and an award-winning marketing executive with 20 years of experience at the nation's top advertising and marketing agencies. Tru currently serves as founder and president of Tru Access, which is an inspiration and empowerment consultancy that serves individuals and organizations by helping them to bridge gaps. His first book, Millennials Revealed, serves as a guide for countless individuals and organizations across the country to help them build meaningful connections across diverse generations. As a diversity and inclusion advocate and committed community bridge builder, Tru has established a strong reputation for building bridges across racial, cultural, social, and relational lines. He currently lives in Cary with his wife of 18 years, Tamika, and their 8-year-old son, Austin. Tru, welcome to the virtual stage. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you, Emmy. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you all for joining. I see there are a number of people that have decided to join this morning, and I'm so excited to be here to share with each and every one of you this morning, and that we have the technology to be able to share even in the midst of this pandemic, that we're blessed with the technology to still be able to connect and share in this way. Obviously, I would love to be in person in front of each and every one of you, seeing those beautiful smiling faces. But I'm glad we have the opportunity to connect nonetheless. And so, and Emmy, as well as Paul, I want to also thank you for your opening comments in acknowledging the hurt and the pain that our nation is experiencing right now. And I think this conference is very timely, speaking about the importance of diversity and inclusion. And I just want everyone to know that although my focus is going to be on building bridges across generations, I want you all to know a lot of the same principles can apply on building bridges across differences, particularly across the racial discord that we're experiencing in our country right now. I would encourage you all to, as you apply some of these principles and best practices to building bridges across the different generations, consider applying these principles to engage in courageous conversations across racial lines as well within your organizations, because as a nation, we're not okay. And that translates into your organizations as well. These conversations are so critical and need to be had. And it is my hope that you all will be able to walk away with this with some insights and perspective that can help you address any divides that you may be experiencing within your organization, and acknowledge that they exist, whether you believe they do or not. And that's why it's important that we talk about it. So again, thank you. And let's go ahead and jump into this discussion today. And you've already heard a little bit about me. I live in Cary, originally from Baltimore. I've lived in Boston, I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in LA, I've lived in New York, and now currently lived in DC, currently living here in Cary. And I gotta admit, of all the places that I live, this is my favorite place to live. And I've been doing a lot of work lately, as you all could imagine, and working with organizations and helping them understand how to build bridges and bridge the divide across racial divides. I started my career off when I founded Tru Access in helping people bridge gaps across generational divides, although the majority of my professional career was in advertising and marketing, and did that for about 20 years prior to launching Tru Access in 2012. And in 2014, right on the heels of Ferguson, is when I really began doing a lot of work with law enforcement agencies, starting here locally in North Carolina, and then across the country and even across the world, helping them to build relationships of trust and legitimacy with the diverse communities that they serve. So you can imagine the increase in engagement over the last couple of weeks when it comes to work in that specific arena. So I'm excited to be here today to talk about building bridges across the generations. And looking at and I just want to say, questions, I will probably not be able to take questions during the presentation because we don't have a lot of time and it's a lot of information to cover. But please put questions in the Q&A, as Emmy suggested earlier, and I will be happy once I'm done to stay on and answer as many questions as I can in the Q&A. And my contact information is right here. And if you want to send me questions directly, feel free to email me questions as well, and I can answer them post this session. All right. So, but I was curious to see what the roll call was, if you will, of the different generations that were represented. And it looks like for this, the first slide that we have, and we have the majority of our representation in Generation X. Not any matures on the call, quite a few baby boomers, and then we also have some millennials, but I provided some visual aid, if you will. I know this slide wasn't up when people were making their decision. You made the decision based on what year you were born, but I thought I'd offer some visual aid to everyone to make a connection with whatever generation that they associated themselves with. and to give you a sense of familiarity, if you will. And so I hope I got it right. I'm always interested with that baby boomer. What was that called again? It was a component set, I think it was, right? It had everything in it, man. But now look at that component set, and in the very devices that we hold in our hand, it includes all of those things in one small device. It is amazing how far we've come with technology. And then we have the millennial generation and Gen Z. But what our focus will be today, and I think it's appropriate based on the poll results, is we're going to really focus on baby boomers, millennials, and Gen Xers, baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, because that was clearly the generations that dominated the representation here today. But in a lot of workplaces, we are seeing 4 to 5 different generations coexist in the workplace. And none of us really expected that to happen. No one was really prepared for that. And that is one of the reasons that it caused some challenges, because there are different mindsets, different values, and we look at life through a different lens based on the generation that we represent. And so that was the generational roll call. And let's move on and just consider some of the perceptions and characteristics of the different generations. And this is always a fun exercise when it's done live and in person, because I'd like to have the audience just share some of the perceptions that they have of different generations. But I never allow the generation that's represented to share. So for baby boomers, I always love allowing the Generation Xers and the millennials to share their perceptions of baby boomers, so that the boomers can hear what their generational counterparts think of them and how they view them. And these are just some of the attributes and perceptions that come up whenever we talk about baby boomers. Strong work ethic, very optimistic, technology averse, not tech savvy, resistant to change, rigid, seeks personal growth, very team oriented, very successful and accomplished. And arguably, baby boomers are the most accomplished generation to date, right? And so these are things that you should keep in mind as we think about the baby boomers, and because these are the perceptions that a lot of their generational counterparts have of them, and some of them rooted in experience. There are some universal truths for all of the generational personalities, but there are a lot of it, and some of it is also rooted in stereotypes. All right, so keep this in mind, how we perceive baby boomers. Now, as far as the Generation X, here are some of the perceptions and characteristics of Generation X. Self-reliant, they value diversity, seeking a work-life balance, where we had the baby boomers that had a very strong work ethic. It was like work before everything. Then you have you have Generation X coming into the workplace, and they come in talking this work-life balance notion. So that began a little bit of a friction and some obvious differences that were emerging between the perception and approach of Generation X as it was to the baby boomers. There was more of a sense of informality. They were a little more tech literate, flexible, particularly with the workplace and how they approach the workplace in that work-life balance, but still very ambitious, but challenged to measure up to the work ethic and the accomplishments of their baby boomer counterparts. And that will come into play in how these two different generations coexist. And then we have the millennial generation. The millennial generation really stirred up quite a fuss as they began to enter into the workplace. I can't tell you how many calls that I received to go in and give trainings and workshops for how to integrate millennials in the workplace. Have C-suite executives, typically baby boomers, quite candidly, giving me a call or reaching out and saying, "Tru, we need your help. We need you to come in here. Like, I don't know what to do with this generation." It's almost like a these kids today type of thing. So when millennials first came into the workplace, it really created a lot of angst and discomfort for a lot of organizations. And they really were on the receiving end of a lot of stereotyped attributes and kind of personality traits. And probably the most popular was, you see that third bullet there, selfish, instant gratification, and lazy. And that was the one that we heard over and over and over, but others were that they were tech savvy, that they embraced diversity, much more confident, connected, community oriented, purpose, passion, and people. That we'll hear a lot about that with the millennial generation, because they are very well connected to purpose, passion, and people. And contrary to popular opinion or popular belief, the belief is that their connection is relegated to technological connection, but that has transcended the technological connectivity and has created attributes that have caused them to seek connection in other areas of their lives, primarily in purpose, passion, and people. So these are some of the most common attributes and characteristics for millennials. And we will talk very briefly about the Gen Z, but there's no Gen Z represented on this call, and it's not a very strong representation in most workplaces right now. So we'll focus primarily on, as I said earlier, the boomers, the Xers, and the millennials. But it's important that we understand, as the Gen Z begins to matriculate into the workplace and looking to the future, understand some of those characteristics and interests and attitudes and opinions and influencers and drivers of this generation as well, because it's not far off before you're going to need to be able to integrate them into the workplace as well. And so smartphone is just kind of a standard operating accessory, very driven and immersed in social media. They've come up in a time where there was constant conflict, their parents experiencing financial stresses, mass shootings almost have been normalized for this generation. And they are accustomed to all access to everything all the time, and have really come up in a time where they've developed this voyeuristic type of way of living due to social media, due to reality TV. So they have an expectation of transparency because they've been conditioned for everything around them that has dictated that sense and expectation of transparency. So that's something that we should really keep in mind with Gen Z as they begin to matriculate into the workplace. So it's important to know as we move on that these are the what's, right? For what the attributes are, what the personality traits are of these different generations. But I cannot stress enough how important it is to understand the why behind the what. And for each generation is defined, each generational archetype is really defined by three primary things. And that is parenting styles, geography, kind of where they grew up, whether in this country or abroad. And even if it's in this country, what region, urban, suburban, rural, north, south, west, east. So it's really determined by parenting styles, geography, and one of the most influential generational shaping attributes is major societal events that help shape a generation. And so this really informs why they have the strong work ethic, why they seek instant gratification, why are Xers self-reliant. It's the major societal events that truly help shape the personality and the archetype of each generation. And so let's look at the timeline of major societal events for each of these generations. And then once we take the time to do this really helps us understand why different generations see the world through the lens in which they see it. And if we take the time to understand the why behind the what, I think one of my favorite quotes around purpose, and it really, purpose is asking the question why. And we should always seek clarity of purpose, particularly in the workplace. That is one of our most valuable resources for having an understanding of people that are different than us, whether that difference is across generational lines, racial lines, gender lines, or whatever that difference may be. And having an organizational purpose that everyone can then align themselves with and rally around and understand the value of how their individual purpose contributes to that organizational purpose. And so that the quote by Miles Monroe that I often share with people is, when we don't understand the purpose of something, abuse is inevitable. And so take the time to understand why baby boomers see the world the way that they do, why they feel the way that they feel. Take the time to understand why that's true for all of your generational counterparts. And if we just look at some of the major societal events that took place during the baby boomer timeline, where JFK was elected, JFK was assassinated, MLK was assassinated. We saw the Civil Rights Act take place, and Martin Luther King had the March on Washington, the Vietnam War, National Organization for Women was founded. They put a man on the moon, Woodstock took place. All of these major events that truly shaped the way that baby boomers see the world. And if we look at this, we can see that there was a lot of civil and political unrest that was taking place, which generated a need and a desire to galvanize and come together to truly put society back on track, because it was seemingly falling apart at the seams. And so this really required an industrious mindset to really put our hands to the plow and work to course correct our nation that seemed to be falling apart at the seams, right? And so that's one of the reasons why work ethic was so important to baby boomers. And we can understand why they see the world the way that they see it if we understand the life experiences that helped shape that worldview, right? So now let's take a look at some of the things that took place during the Generation X timeline, right? And some of the things that helped shape the worldview for Generation X. Now, I'm a Gen X, and I saw that the majority of the people that took the poll are Gen X. So shout out to my Gen X brothers and sisters. And I just have to take a moment right here. You know, I'm a little biased, right? Because this is my generation. I feel like Gen X, right? You can see it's not a whole lot. Like baby boomers was like 78 million. When we get to millennials, you'll see that's like 80 million plus, but like 46, close to 50 million, somewhere in between there. So it wasn't a lot of us. And whenever you have conversations, whenever you hear conversations about the different generations, and y'all know I'm telling the truth, everybody's gonna nod their head when I say this. It's always about the baby boomers or the millennials. What's up with us Gen X? It's like being Gen X is like being that middle kid, right? We never really get a whole lot of attention every day, giving the love to that firstborn or the baby, right? We just kind of stuck in the middle. I'm telling y'all, look, y'all know I'm telling the truth. I remember going to people's houses, and you never really see a lot of pictures of the middle kid. Like that first kid, like there's pictures all over the place of that first kid, right? Then the baby, you know, you got pictures of the baby. And I'm like hanging out with my friend who's a middle kid. I'm like, yo, bro, like, you sure you live here? Like, is this your house? Like, for real? Like, it's just never like, so I feel like, you know, I know this, y'all just helping me with my therapy session right now. But Gen X, I mean, we like that middle child, but I digress. But there are some things that took place with Gen X that really helped shape the way that we view and approach the world as well. And it wasn't a whole lot of really positive things. And, you know, if we remember the things that we saw with the baby boomers, you know, putting the man on the moon, and, you know, with the civil rights movement and the National Organization for Women, like things that were really civic minded and really accomplished things. They had tragedy, absolutely. But if you look at the things that took place during Gen X, there was the energy crisis. I don't know how many of y'all remember the gas lines, like the gas lines was crazy. Then, you know, we had hip hop, like one of my favorite things that emerged from the Gen X, the hostage crisis, but the rise of the PC and MTV. And then, you know, we had things like the crack epidemic and the Challenger disaster, the Pan Am flight. But the World Wide Web was introduced, email became a thing. So these are the things that really shaped the mindset of Gen X. But something to keep in mind with Gen X as well is, and if you saw some of the attributes earlier, the self-reliant is because this was also a time when divorce rates skyrocketed in America. And we really began to introduce planned parenting. And those are the things that really caused this generation to not be as large as the other generation. And so there were a lot of single parents or parents working that really didn't allow for this generation to be as large as that baby boomer generation or even the millennial generation. So abortion was legalized during this time. So you had the divorce rate skyrocketing, abortion was legalized, Planned Parenthood became a thing. And so we created this culture of latchkey kids. And I remember being a latchkey kid, right? Coming home from school, had the key around my neck, and let myself in the house, and like mom had a list of things that I had to get done. Was a magnet on the refrigerator. Is that just me, or just maybe that's just me, right? Well, mom had a list of things on the refrigerator of things I had to get done. Me and my brother had to get done before she got home, right? So that is where the self-reliance came in, because we were accustomed to having to do things on our own and having a very strong sense of independence. And so that's where that self-reliance piece came in with the Generation X. And so then we move on to the millennial generation, right? The millennial generation, the generation that really caused a lot of uproar, had organizations and corporations up in arms, had C-suite baby boomer executives pulling their hair out like, I don't know what to do with these kids. And if you look at this timeline of events for the millennials and things that took place, we can't help but notice the advent of technology. The advent of technology is very prominent. And so what's happened with the millennial generation, and they obviously had some unfortunate incidents that took place during their timeline as well. 9/11 took place during their timeline. The war in Iraq, right, took place during their timeline. There were mass shootings as well that took place during their timeline. So there were definitely some tragedies that took place, but technology was probably the most dominant influencer for this generation. And what we should keep in mind when we're thinking about the millennial generation and their attributes and their mindset and how they view and approach the world is the technology that was present for this generation has shaped and created values and behaviors that could not even exist without the presence of this technology. So the values and behaviors that have been formed, shaped, and adopted by the millennial generation, being the first generation of digital natives. Now, technology was introduced for us, for the Xers, not so much for the baby boomers, but it began to be introduced for Xers. So we kind of had 1 foot digital, 1 foot analog. But millennials were the first generation of true digital natives, which is why there was such an adjustment, because they were the first. It's not going to be as much of an adjustment, or it has not been as much of an adjustment for Gen Z, because we now have some sense of familiarity that the millennials ushered in. But because they were the first generation of digital natives, it was a pretty big learning curve for their generational counterparts, simply because they were the first. And keeping in mind that it shaped and created values and behaviors that otherwise could not and would not even exist without the presence of the technology. So if I talk to my baby boomers for a second, and the frustration of instant gratification for millennials, and I get it, but I contend and I would suggest to you that if you grew up in a time where you could get anything that you wanted at the push of a button, you can get an exclusive item that was only offered in Japan at your doorstep overnight at the push of a button. If you could have a meal prepared and didn't have to necessarily use the crock pot or put it in the oven and tell the kids don't jumping and running around while the cake is in the oven because it'll fall. I never really understood that, but I digress. If you could get a full meal prepared and ready for you at the push of a button, if you could walk out of your door and push a button and have your car started, warmed up, and ready to go at the push of a button, if all of this technology enabled you to live that in that manner, I would suggest that you would have developed an instant gratification mindset too. And so let's just kind of keep in mind how these values and behaviors are shaped. And a lot of it is based on the major societal events that took place during the time in which we were coming of age. And also understanding, as we talked about before, about purpose, passion, and people, contrary to popular belief about this generation, is that they are lazy. I think the difference is they want to be aligned with the things that they're passionate about. They want to be aligned with a sense of purpose and know that they're aligned with organizations that have a sense of purpose. That's why we see the turnover rate for millennials on average at any organization has been about 2.5 years before moving on, because for whatever reason, they don't feel as though they're in alignment with their assignment. Why am I here? Why am I here in this place on this earth, but also in this organization? Is this organization purpose-driven? Is it fueling and feeding my passion? Because it's been my experience, and even in the research with the book, is once they've identified something that they're passionate about, this generation will work around the clock. And I would not associate that with being lazy. And so what technology has done, it has created this desire to be connected, but it's transcend technological connections. This generation wants to be connected to purpose. They want to be connected to their passions. And they also, contrary to popular opinion, want to be connected to people, but connected to the people that help fuel their passions and empower them with purpose. And for those of you who work with them, some of you Xers and some of you boomers realize that there are some of your millennial counterparts who will gravitate to you for whatever reason. That reason is because you are one of those people that fuel their passion and empower them with a sense of purpose. They want to be connected to you because you are providing them with that blueprint. You are giving them that GPS. You are helping that GPS. You're helping to reveal their gifts, fuel their passion, and help them provide a service, right? That's the GPS that millennials follow to help guide them to their purpose, their gifts, their passions, and their service. And if you are an individual or an organization that can help them plot the course of that GPS, then you are the person that they are gravitating to. You are the person that they want to be connected with. And so these are some of the attributes that each of the different generations have and how they've been shaped, but more importantly, why they view the world the way that they view the world. And so it's a matter of taking the time to understand how to build bridges across those differences, because there are generation gaps with every generation. This is nothing new. There's a generation gap with every generation. And with each generation, it brings a new era that introduces new expressions and, more importantly, new expectations. Because the same expectations that existed for baby boomers cannot necessarily be the same expectations that we now project onto millennials, because the times are different. The world has evolved, the world has changed. And what we need to understand is the biggest gap that we need to fill, whether this is generational, whether this is racial, whether this is cultural, the biggest gap that presents a challenge to most organizations is the expectation gap, because we tend to project our expectations onto others. What was expected of us, we tend to stay in line with that and believe that now is consistently true across generations, which it's not. And we project our expectations onto others. But now each generation ushers in a new era with new expressions and new expectations. So that expectation gap, and if you all can see me, and I hope you can see me, the expectations are here. And so I'm having one hand held up higher, right, than the other hand. And so the expectation is at a certain point. But then the experience that someone delivers comes in below what that expectation is, and that creates a gap. And that gap needs to get closed, and it gets closed one of two ways. Now, unfortunately, most of us close the expectation gap, and I hope you all can see me. I hope no one's dialed in and everyone is connected in via the Zoom, so you can see this visual. But one hand is higher than the other. The higher hand is the expectation. The lower hand is the experience that is delivered. Now, that gap typically gets closed by us lowering our expectations of that individual, when what we should be doing to close the gap is to invest in that individual in a way to help them understand how to elevate the experience to meet the expectation. But we also have to be willing to manage expectations based on the era and the times that we're in. So taking the time to close the expectation gap by helping people to elevate the experience and not lowering our expectations, which I've seen happen way too often when it comes to generational differences. So how do we bridge the gap? Well, that's one way, but I want to give you a few principles as we move on some things that we should consider for how we close the gap. And if we look at the differences, this will then set the stage for how we need to approach closing the gap. So with boomers, we saw dramatic social change, political unrest, a lot of causes and protests. But does that sound familiar? Keep in mind, for the most part, and just a little bit of an anecdote here, millennials, for the most part, are children of the baby boomers. And so the biggest contention in the workplace is between boomers and millennials. And it's interesting that whether these different demographics or these different generations want to acknowledge it or not, they are much more alike than they probably would like to believe. And I believe it was said that we can teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. And that's why we see a lot of similarities between millennials and baby boomers. And if you look at the societal conditions and the times that we're in right now, we can see a lot of similarities: dramatic social change, political unrest, causes and protests. And that kind of led the boomers, based on the time that they're in, to create and foster this industrial age, a need to galvanize and get results. So that really was born, a spirit of conflict breeds unity was born out of that. Very industrious in nature, hard work pays. I mean, the answer to any question you want to ask a boomer, the answer is always hard work. So Dad, how do I get, Kimberly to go to the prom with me? Hard work, son, hard work. So the answer from a boomer is always hard work for anything. And so then with Gen X, we see that a lot of the things that were taking place, an introduction of diversity, a lot of instability and tragedy, but then there was technology and mass media being introduced. So that was information sources, different information sources. And there was a need, along with the resources, to identify new ways to win, right? So we were introduced to the encyclopedias for Generation X. So we were the true information age. A lot of people want to say that millennials were the information age, but the information age was really Xers with the introduction of the World Wide Web and the introduction of the PC. And I think we had World Book or Britannica. Well, the Britannica was the brown one, right? And World Book was the red one. I don't remember. Y'all probably remember that. I know y'all remember the encyclopedias, right? The salesman coming around, something like that was Google, right? That was Google before Google. You had to just flip through, if you had to do a report on Mesopotamia, you better hope that the M encyclopedia wasn't missing. But again, I digress. But that's what happened with Generation X. And that really shaped a generational kind of a mindset and attribute of the information age. And then we have millennials. We saw the effects of exclusion and seclusion, being relegated to a certain part of the population or the workforce based on the stereotypes. But they had a level of global awareness, and the advent of advanced technology really gave them access to information. And so this was truly the connection age, because they were able to connect across the world, across the globe, and leverage that connection. But they also understand a need for change, and truly blaming the generations that came before them for the conditions of the society that we live in. So divided, so fractured. The recession, they've experienced 2 recessions in the span of a decade. So they are blaming the societal conditions on the generations that came before them, boomers and Xers. And they see a need for change, and they believe a better world starts with a better them. So they are looking to be the best person that they can be. That's why purpose and civic duty and responsibility is so important to them. And they are also the collaboration generation, largely because they've needed to combine resources and forces in order to make the impact that they want to make, largely because of the financial situations and circumstances that they found themselves in. All right, so as we move on, I want to really talk to you about the generational turns of the new era, new expressions, and new expectations, and really quickly help you understand that generational turns, there are 4 generational turns with every generation that comes across to create a generational cycle, right? And the 4 turns that creates a cycle is a generational high, a generational awakening, a generational unraveling, and then a generational crisis. And I would suggest that we are in crisis right now. But the good news is they repeat themselves approximately every 20 years or so. And we go from a high where the economy's good, things are good, industry's good. Then we go from an awakening because the major major industries in our society are the ones that are driving society forward. And then that awakening, people are now wanting a sense of autonomy and individuality. Why are we all just following and trusting these major institutions to set the tone and conditions for our society? And then that unraveling begins as people start to take a closer look at institutions, at businesses, at corporations, to see exactly how purpose-driven and civically responsible they are. And they start to unravel and pick apart the ones that they don't believe are effective leaders, are conscientious leaders, are doing the things that organizations should do, corporate responsibility. And then we get to the crisis because a lot of the major organizations that were driving the economy and causing our society to thrive have now been dismantled, and there is no strong and effective industry of leadership, institutions of leadership. But then the next generation comes along to build back up the ones that they believe to be responsible and worthy of leadership. And that ushers us back to a generational high by the institutions that are purpose-driven and exercise civic responsibilities and showcase civic responsibility. And then the cycle repeats itself. And this is history that dates back to the early 1500s of how we've gone through those generational turns from generation to generation. So the challenge is we're in the midst of a crisis. The good news is eventually we will be ushered back to a generational high based on history. But only the institutions that show themselves worthy to be responsible leaders, civically responsible, socially responsible, morally responsible, and those that are purpose-driven will be the ones that we will see ushered back to lead us back to a generational high. And so moving on, I want to talk quickly as I'm beginning to run out of time. So we have to keep in mind that purpose is so important to this generation, millennials and beyond, because during the boomer time, product was the hero. If I had, Bounty paper towels. I said, hey, Bounty is better. I got the best product. People believed I had the best product. I said Tide washed whiter. It was the product that was the hero. You bought Tide because it washed whiter. But then as we went into the Generation X, personality became important for the corporations and brands that we associated ourselves with. That's why we began to see celebrity personalities, whether it was Michael Jackson with Pepsi, it was Michael Jordan, it was Ray Charles, it was all of these personalities associated with brands to give the brand a personality that people could connect with and relate to. And we saw a lot of that with Gen X, why we began to see a lot of influencers. Now, with millennials and beyond, the first 2 are points of entry. You still need a quality product. And there's still an expectation that your organization or brand has a personality, but it needs to have a purpose. The first 2 are points of entry. Those are expected. But now, moving forward, are you purpose-driven? Are you standing for something? And how are you articulating something? This generation believes that every dollar that they spend is a vote for the type of world that they want. And so they are only aligning themselves internally and externally with brands that they believe foster meaningful purpose. And so I want to talk now really quickly about the different values and work styles. And I think this is important for each and every one of you, understanding that there are differences, right? And if I'll just focus on baby boomers, Xers, and millennials. For boomers, work is a priority. Generation X, we know their self-reliance is important. And millennials, fast-paced. And so what I would say to baby boomers, yes, that is a priority for you. And we understand that work ethic is important, but it's just viewed and seen differently through different lenses. So for Generation X, we have to understand that, yes, they want to get the work done. But oftentimes they have been conditioned to work independently And that doesn't mean they're not working as hard as you because you don't see them working. And then millennials, I want to say to you, because you have access to unprecedented information, let's not mistake information for knowledge. It is not knowledge until it has been applied. And your generational X and baby boomer counterparts have been applying information that is translated into knowledge for years. So take the time to engage with them, to learn how to translate the information that you have into knowledge, and not believe that you know more because you have access to more information. And I've heard some millennials say, yeah, Tru, I talk to Charles in the office, baby boomer Charles, but every time I go to him, like he wants to tell a story. And look, that's the way Charles is going to share the information with you. So you may have to just sit down and listen to Charles tell that story, because that's the way he operates. That's the way he functions, but you'll be better off for it. And so understanding that, and I think the visual speaks well to it. There are different ways and preferences of sharing and gathering information. Write me, call me, email me, text me. And I know there's been so much frustration and communication breakdowns where there may be that baby boomer or Xer manager or C-suite executives that says to that millennial counterpart, hey, I need you to reach out to the customer or the client and let them know we'll be running late. That millennial says, all right, I got you, no worries. You show up and the client has no idea that you were running late and they're frustrated. So now that baby boomer is confused and frustrated with their millennial counterpart. And they say, I thought I told you to reach out. And it's like, I did. I texted him as soon as you told me. Why'd you text him? You should have called him. And it's like communication breakdown. Reach out to one generation may mean something very different to the other generation. So let's understand that these simple things could cause communication breakdowns if we do not take the time to get to know the communication styles and preferences of others. And so just want to move on as I quickly seek to wrap this up. So communication styles are much better received when they are viewed as respectful. So respectful communication styles across the generations should be descriptive. They should show regard and still maintain a sense of connection with that individual. Disrespectful communication styles are critical of the person, disregards the person, and creates a wedge of disconnection between you and the person. It's the activity, it's the behavior. So make it descriptive, still show regard for that individual, recognizing and knowing that we're on the same team, we want the same thing, and that's how you stay connected. And so moving on to the next one is how do we bridge the gaps? And I'll keep this quick and I'll keep this simple. And again, I'll answer the questions in the Q&A once I'm done, but let's go on to talk about these principles of how to bridge the gaps. And there are three things that we need to know when bridging the gaps: the importance of meeting others where they are, loving them where they are, and then we can effectively lead them where they need to go. And when I say meet others where they are, don't meet them just where you think they should be or where you want them to be. We have to meet them where they are. This goes for all of the generations. Millennials to boomers, boomers to Xers, Xers to millennials. Like, it's not a one-way thing. We all have to do this. And as hokey as it sounds, we then have to love them where they are. Even if we don't love where they are, it's important to love them where they are. Not love as a feeling, but a choice and a decision to be empathetic, to be compassionate, to be understanding. Love them where they are. And if you do the first two, you've positioned yourself to be able to effectively lead them where they should go. And then I just want to move on because I know I'm running out of time. And I want to give you the explanation of what we call the 4-step meet model when meeting people where they are. The M in that meet is make time to engage. I know we're all busy, but it's important that you make the time to engage. The E is take the time to explore similarities and differences. And it's okay that there are differences, but trust me, you'll realize that there are more similarities than differences. There's more that connects you than should separate you. And talk about those similarities and differences openly and candidly. But in that conversation, encourage respect. Let's not be dismissive of other people's situations, circumstances, realities, or experiences simply because they are not our own. Because it didn't happen to you, because you haven't experienced that, doesn't mean it's not real for that person. And then take responsibility. That's the T. as much as we want to bridge this gap and we all want to be solutions providers, taking responsibility requires us to look in the mirror and not only say, how can I be a part of the solution, but ask yourself the question and be honest with your response of how have I been contributing to the problem? This is the 4-step MEET model. And so moving on to kind of wrap things up, 3 action steps that I'll give you and then I'll close out is start with why, right? When you don't know the purpose of something, abuse is inevitable. Always start with why, gain clarity of purpose. Then step 2 of an action step, elevate the experience. Don't close the expectation gap by lowering your expectations. Take time to invest in your colleagues by helping them elevate the experience to meet and manage expectations. And then finally, be inclusive. Where there's little to no inclusion, where there's little to no inclusion, there is little to no commitment. The more you can include people in the processes, the thoughts, the ideations, and the solutions that you are seeking to accomplish, instead of dictating to them your terms based on your generational expectations and experience, they may have a different, unique, and a helpful way of accomplishing what you want to accomplish. Be inclusive and solicit input from others. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is my time. And I thank you all for your time and your patience with me. I will answer questions that I see in the Q&A, but here is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me with any comments, questions, or thoughts, and I'd be happy to avail myself to you. And if any of you are struggling with how to have courageous conversations across race, please reach out to me. That is something I'm very passionate about, and I am devoted to helping as many organizations as I can navigate through these troubling times that we're all experiencing right now. Thank you.